But I also want to say this part, and I think this is the important part that people need to understand in this conversation. Not having children does not mean that I don't have a vested interest in my fellow Americans and their children, right?
Yeah.
And the future leaders of this world and the future Picassos and creators and the next Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. Like, I have a vested interest in all of that, because at the end of the day, when a child gets up and goes to school and comes back home, the last thing they should be worried about is, I wonder if someone's going to run up in my school today with a gun. And this is going to be my last. That's not. See, let me formulate my thought. Going back to when I went to college, to elementary and secondary school. Let me say it. Put it on record. In the 70s and 80s, when some of the people listening were born or weren't born yet, right?
No, we're not born. No.
Right. The only drill we ever had was a fire drill. Right. And it was in an orderly fashion. We'd leave, we walk down the stairs, go down, blah, 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 blah. We had to know the egresses. We had to know the exit plans. We had to, if there's a fire, stay against the wall, hold on to your partner's hand. Like, that's what we did. I'm trying to imagine what a gun safety drill looks like in a school. Because the other thing is, they're talking about, I read this thing online where this teacher was saying how he flips his desks over. I actually think, no, I didn't read it online. I think you read it to me.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Where the teacher flips the desk over. What I know to be true is that these wooden desks are not bulletproof.
No.
So if you come in with one of these semi-automatic assault rifles, it's ripping right through that. Like, you're giving false hope, basically. Right. That's all you're doing.
Right. Pretend.
So I'm unsure what disturbs me about the conversation that we're having today is the fact that we're having it.
Right.
Is the fact that this is a conversation my mother never had the entire time both of her kids went to school.
So I think that's part of it for me, that I fundamentally struggle with, this kind of like, why don't we find it ludicrous that we even have to have this conversation, right? Like, why is it I don't understand why it's not a no-brainer that we need to create policies that will help ensure public safety on this level. And the other piece that I think is really important to bring to the table is, as an adult, I am deeply impressed by the activists, the young activists. Like, these are teenagers. These are not even college age students. But the young activists who have organized themselves, who refuse to be silent, and who are educating themselves about the issues and about policy. I'm so inordinately impressed by them. And I also feel angry because I feel like they shouldn't have to be the ones to fight for their own safety. I'm wondering where the traction comes in from adults to be able to really do this work and lobby and change the conversation and provide a sense of safety. And again, I go to this other piece around, and so some of the Parkland shooter activists, they have been on a social media campaign. They've gotten a lot of media attention. They've been on all the major news networks, interviewed, filmed at rallies, et cetera, et cetera. They are using social media platforms in very smart, savvy ways that really only millennials get to be able to do, because they've not grown up in a time without having access to social media. and they're doing all of that. But one of them, one of the ones that I've been most impressed with, and I think has been most vocal, is this young woman, Emma Gonzalez, and she, tweeted that her and her group of fellow classmates. She said, we benefit from a certain privilege. Like, people have responded to us in a matter of days and weeks when there have been young Black activists on the ground doing this work for years, and people haven't responded to them or heard their cry or heard their outrage. And I really think that has to be also another part of the conversation. So we have folks like the Black Youth Project 100 in Chicago that's been around since 2013. As maligned as it has been in the broader media, we also have to recognize, like, the Black Lives Matter movement was established in 2015 in response to Trayvon Martin's murder. We've seen pictures of and media coverage of young Black activists in Chicago and in Ferguson on the ground saying, we don't want gun violence in our communities. Like, I know it is.
Because you hear me, just to the listeners, Dr. Nikki can hear me when you can't, because I mute my microphone. So she hears me over here, and I think I made this joke before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here's the thing. I can't sweet baby Jesus, be a fence around my tongue right now.
It's swallowing clothes.
Here's the thing. I can't, for me, it's philosophy almost all day long, and sometimes at the expense of human emotion, right? Let's just own that.
Yes.
And that's one of the big things where I talk philosophy, you talk psychology, and I go, yeah, I forgot about people. They always mess things up. But in this regard, I throw philosophy and logic and all of that completely out the door, and I look at the human aspects of this completely. And I say to myself, I am unwilling to sit up here and have this conversation without acknowledging some hard truth. And I want every single one of the listeners to acknowledge it yourself. And I'm going to say this. If what I'm about to say pisses you off, you are probably part of the problem, and you have a reason to be. The reason why these young youth of color are not being heard, because the perception is that's how those people live in those communities. That's not a problem. That's just who they are. But when it goes into these predominantly white communities, oh my goodness, now it's a problem. Right. And I'm going to go ahead on and say this. And I don't have a 7-second delay, so it's just going to come out the way it is. It's because you sat back and let that bullshit happen in communities of color that it is spilled over into places like Parkland. You have the opportunity to deal with the issue, but you chose not to. America, this is on you.
On a level that we have only just glimpsed from our gated communities, have never had their voices heard in their entire lives the way that we have in these few weeks alone. Since we all share in feeling this pain, and we know it all too well, how it feels to have to grow up at the snap of a finger. We were able to cover a lot of ground in communicating our experiences. People of color in inner cities and everywhere have been dealing with this for a despicably long time, and the media cycles just don't cover the violence the way they did here. The platform us Parkland students have established is to be shared with everyone, Black or white, gay or straight, religious or not, who has experienced gun violence, and hand in hand, side by side, we will make this change together. So, in a lot of the work that I do, when I teach about social justice, when I talk about social justice to my students and try to live it in my life and in the work that I do, people in doing that, at the same time, my heart hurts. And I do feel overwhelmed emotionally to think about that very truth in her statement, and that these are people that have been ignored for a very long time, because they have been perpetrated on and not seen as victims. So when it happens, when gun violence happens in communities of color, when gun violence happens in poor communities, it is the function of oppression to blame those as victims and not allow their victimhood to be seen.
Now I need you to break that down for people who don't understand that. Because again, the problem oftentimes when we have this conversation is people who don't want to hear that truth want to run to, oh, you want me to feel guilty. No one's talking about white guilt. No one's talking about white blame. And I'm not interested in white tears. What we are discussing.
I think they think something is wrong with it, but I think they feel, no, I'm not going to say that. I think that they think something is wrong with it. I think they know that something needs to be done, but I think they also are aware that if they don't do it for themselves, nobody else will. And that's the part that I find most heartbreaking.
And so, sometimes, if we're being completely honest and having a balanced conversation, sometimes doing it for yourself when you're dealing with that level of violence is joining the violence itself. Which is why you have so many of these young people. You find politicians really quick to say, the gangs, the gangs, the gangs. Well, why are the gangs? Sometimes these young...
I think that's part of it. I think the other part about it is, I think it's let me say it this way. The common discourse is to make things be those quote unquote inner city youth are embedded in gun violence and drug trafficking, and it's just part of the way things are for them. And then we should just, they should just stop killing each other, right? I mean, that's the first thing that comes up almost inevitably.
Right. Just stop shooting.
With the Black Lives Matter, right? But
just say no.
Black Lives conversation comes up, if it's not met with Blue Lives Matter, then it's met with, what about black on black crime? As if those two things have one to do with each other. So I think we have a real tendency to want to distill things down in very simple terms. And the reality is it is far more complicated than that.
Absolutely. And that's why the examples I gave were examples. Again, we speak in terms, and I need to remember that people often think in terms of absolutes, and I do not. I think in terms of this is one potential example, or this is a story that I know to be true because this is a story that I have heard. That
there's a party or a group that has power and privilege, and a party and a group that has less power and privilege. That is, there's an advantage group and there's a disadvantage group. And the system is that those two pieces work together. And said differently, it means one can only have power if there's a group from which they have power over, right? So it's about a relative degree. So when we talk about race to a career and to an income, that is one that would elevate them out of the position they're in. And we're also talking about people that are recipients of generational victims of racism, right? And when I say this stuff is complicated, I really need people to hear that it's complicated, because what we're finding out now more through the study of epigenetics and through public health research and through research around stress and health and behavioral well-being is that some of this stuff is transmitted in the DNA level. Some of this, when we talk about generational poverty, we talk about generational in dealing with chronic racism and race-related stress, we're talking about things that have been passed on physiologically from parent to child. So you have a group of people that are on a basic level coming into the world with physiological challenges to their well-being to start with. We also have increasing information from our good friends in the neuropsychology field and neuroimaging field to know that early part of